blew this off.
Looking for something. When he saw the wooden bench Harris had been sitting on, his eyes lit up. He walked over to the bench, reached out his hand, and pressed it into the wooden bench. He left it there for a few seconds and then removed it. Harris had heard stories about extraordinary strength and techniques afforded by training in various martial arts, but he had considered most of them to be exaggerated. But, he mused, Western culture had adopted many different traditions from around the world. Yoga was hugely popular for both its mental and physical benefits, and it had become widely accepted that some traditional therapies, such as acupuncture, afforded relief to many ailments. So, what they say about martial arts is true, he thought. Harris decided to have some fun with the old man.
I want to do that to my own. Oh, I have to.
Episode 159, Surprising the Expert. Harris looked at the old man in admiration and exclaimed with enthusiasm, "Wow, that's amazing!" He looked at the palm print on the bench with interest and suddenly said, "I'm going to give it a go." The old man looked at Harris, perplexed. He can't honestly believe he can emulate such a difficult feat. He watched as Harris pressed his hand down on the bench next to where he had made the imprint. The old man looked at Harris in shock. That boy is naive if he thinks that just anyone can do that with his bare hands, he thought. Shock turned to derision, and a wry smile formed on his face. Let's see this kid make a fool of himself, he thought. But then Harris lifted his hand and let out a small squeal of delight. Wow! Look, I've done it! I pressed my palm into the wood and made a print. I must be good at martial arts too, he exclaimed as he looked up at the old man. The old man's smile vanished, and he looked in disbelief at the handprint beside his own on the wooden bench. He was astounded that not only had the boy made an imprint in the wood, but that his imprint was deeper. He couldn't believe what he had just witnessed. His head was swimming, and he looked at Harris in complete bewilderment. But uppermost in his mind was the prospect that he could take this boy on as an apprentice. He quickly recognized that he could claim credit for his amazing skills. He knew how rare it was to come across someone with such natural ability, and he believed it was his luck that he had come across this young man today. He believed in fate. He sat down on the bench and gestured to Harris to sit beside him. Then he looked again at the twin palm prints on the wooden bench. "How did you do it?" he asked. Harris had to suppress a smile. After all, this wasn't much of a challenge for him, but the old man didn't know that. "It wasn't difficult," he said nonchalantly. And when the old man heard this, he couldn't believe his ears. "Not hard," he spluttered. The old man's name was Arthur Brooks, and he was the president of the Chicago National Art Association. Arthur had practiced Tai Chi for decades. As a young art student, he had visited China in his youth, one of the first tourists to do so once China opened for tourism after it had been closed for decades to the outside world. When he returned to the States, he had brought his love for Tai Chi back with him. Upon his return, he maintained his practice and cultivated an interest in other martial arts. He had enjoyed good mental and physical health throughout his life, and he believed that his lifelong passion played no small part in that. It was particularly noticeable at this stage of his life when he compared himself to most of his peers. However, just a month ago, he had noticed a peculiar change. Although he had always been fit and strong, as expected, his health had shown signs of deterioration with age over the past few years. But about a month ago, he had noticed his skills seemed to have improved, and his body had felt rejuvenated, and he had felt better than he had for years. He couldn't remember feeling better, either mentally or physically, and he had discovered the ability to press a 1/4 of an inch palm print into the wood with only the force of his body. He firmly believed that this resulted from decades of dedication, training, and hard work. He had no other explanation. Tai Chi had always played a major part in his life, and now this kid was telling him that it wasn't difficult. "I've spent most of my life achieving this level of skill and fitness, and this kid has said that it's not hard. How dare he thought. Who the hell does he think he is?" He felt outraged and aggrieved. Arthur regarded Harris as if he were a Philistine, but then another thought crossed his mind, and he frowned slightly. Could this boy be anything to do with the improvements I noticed a month ago? He thought. It's all too strange not to be connected. He already has a huge natural talent. If I took him on as my apprentice, imagine how strong and impressive he would be, all under my training. When Harris saw the look on Arthur's face change, he became wary. Suddenly, the old man looked at him with an odd, eager look in his eyes, and Harris had a frightening thought. Who is he? Why is he so invested in me? Maybe he knows about the system, he thought. Harris suddenly became very afraid. He looked at the old man and said, Sir, I'm not interested. Episode 160. I'll be your teacher. Harris's words confused Arthur. What is it? Who do you think I am? He asked. He looked at Harris and said, Why do you look so afraid? I'm just an old man practicing Tai Chi in the park. Then he added, I see that you're kind and patient, and I'd like to take you on as my apprentice. I think you could learn a lot from me. Otherwise, I assure you, I'm not interested in you. He waved his hand dismissively. Harris was surprised. He certainly hadn't expected the old man to invite him to be his apprentice. But as he considered this, he narrowed his eyes and decided, No, I don't trust him. There's something about him. Then he had an idea and decided to play along. Wow, you want me as your apprentice? He asked. On hearing this reaction, Arthur believed he had managed to persuade Harris, and he adopted a kindly expression. Well, I can see you're sincere, and if you work hard, you'll learn much from me, he said. Harris looked at Arthur and pretended to be deep in thought. He glanced at the two palm prints on the bench, one deeper than the other, and he had an idea. But sir, look, my palm print is much deeper than yours, so that must mean I'm better at martial arts than you, he said with innocence. Surely, I should be your teacher. I'm much stronger than you. When Arthur heard this, he realized that he could actually find himself in danger with this boy, and it suddenly occurred to him that if he could make an imprint like that in wood, then he was likely to possess more strength and power than he did. This thought made him want to run. He took one last look at Harris, then turned and hurriedly walked away without another word. He couldn't get away fast enough. Sir, why are you leaving? Don't you want me as your teacher? Harris shouted after him at the top of his voice. Arthur staggered as he broke into a run. Under the tree, Eric and Nigel were watching this exchange with interest. They had seen the two chatting together, and they wondered whether there was something between them. However, the manner in which the old man had
I'm gonna
fled
have to read
indicated
it.
something had passed between them and disturbed him. They looked at each other in confusion, but, for now, they had missed their chance. Harris looked at the old man disappearing into the distance with a satisfied smile. Back home, Harris sat on a chair in his room. At his feet lay two empty energy drink boxes. He stared at the black pills in his hand and frowned slightly. He was disappointed with the success rate of his endeavors with the energy drink. I didn't expect that out of 48 bottles of drink, the system would only be successful 9 times, he complained. However, even with these 9 endurance pills, my endurance value will be doubled. That should be enough for the time being, he reasoned. With that, Harris didn't give it another thought. He took the black pills and swallowed them one by one. Once he had taken them all, he checked the system panel in his body data column. His endurance value had already increased from 0.8 to 1.9. He was pretty satisfied with that outcome. Harris had also noticed that he was feeling a little short of breath lately, so he tried the Samurai Warrior martial arts training method to see whether that would provide any improvements. Sure enough, after the training, he felt that the tightness in his chest had disappeared. He was beginning to feel that these changes he made not only affected him and his physical appearance, but also how people regarded him. This made Harris feel very positive. Episode 161. Cousin Freya visits Chicago. Once Harris had just finished eating lunch, he decided he would go out and see if he could find a skilled craftsman who could make him some weapons. How can I call myself a weapons expert if I don't have any weapons? He thought. I have the thrown weapons skill, which means I can throw a knife with expertise, and I don't even possess a knife. It's a joke. He had broken down 9 pieces of refined iron on his way home the day before, and he thought that would be an excellent material for a throwing dagger. He just needed to find a skilled bladesmith. As he was about to leave, his cell phone rang. Who is it now? He thought. Then he looked at the display to check. It was his cousin, Freya, the daughter of his mother's sister. As soon as he saw the name, he quickly answered. Freya? Hey, Harris. How are you? Said the voice on the other side of the phone. Harris smiled and said, Freya! Long time no see. How are you? I know, it's been ages, but you'll see me soon. I'm actually in Chicago now, and I went to your house, but your neighbor said you moved out, she explained. Harris was surprised. But Freya, shouldn't you be in college? Freya's voice faltered, and she said quietly, Something happened, and I had to leave college early this semester. Harris sensed that his cousin was holding something back. Freya, go to Dad's restaurant, and I'll meet you there. Okay, I'll see you soon, she said before she hung up. Harris's face creased into a concerned frown. I wonder what's happened. What's so important that she had to leave college early? And how was her mom allowed her to come to Chicago at all? The fact was that Freya's mother and Isabella did not get along well. Although Freya kept in regular contact with her aunt and cousins, her mother did not approve. It was highly improbable that she could have endorsed a midterm visit to Chicago. Mom! Harris shouted through to Isabella, who was busy in the kitchen. Freya is in Chicago, so I'm going over to pick her up from the restaurant. And before Isabella could respond or ask any questions, Harris was already out of the door. She rushed after him, but he had already disappeared down the street. Isabella had her questions. She couldn't understand why Freya had come to Chicago or why she wasn't in college either. Why does Harris never explain anything? She asked herself. Harris had hailed a cab, and when they had reached a parking lot near the restaurant, he had asked the driver to wait. This had required some negotiation, which only served to remind Harris why he wanted to get his driver's license. It would be so much more convenient if he could drive himself around, rather than relying on taxis and public transportation. As he walked toward the restaurant, Harris thought about his cousin. They regularly kept in touch over video calls, but hadn't seen each other in person for a while. He remembered her as a tall, well-dressed, attractive young woman, and imagined she would be carrying a purse and pulling a suitcase. But when he caught sight of his cousin waiting outside the restaurant, she was wearing a casual white t-shirt, baggy pants, and wearing flip-flops. It was unusual to see her dressed so casually, but what was more concerning was the anxious look on her face. Freya had been waiting outside the restaurant for a while, and a man had followed her, and it was freaking her out. All she had been able to think about were reports of women being attacked, and as she had waited, she had become increasingly afraid. She was reassured when she heard Harris's voice. Freya, over here, he shouted, and she quickly followed the direction of the voice and saw a boy coming toward her. She was very happy to see Harris, and as soon as she set eyes on him, she was no longer afraid. She hurriedly dragged her suitcase to meet him. Episode 162. You're being followed. The man who had followed Freya looked away briefly when Harris met his cousin, but when he thought it was safe, he glanced back. He saw that Harris was only a kid and didn't think he would be a problem. Freya ran up to Harris to give him a big hug, and while she had her arms wrapped around his neck, she whispered in his ear, Harris, I think there's a man following me. Harris was initially surprised to get such a welcome from his cousin, but he understood when he heard what she said. He looked over her shoulder, and when he saw the man, he knew exactly who she was talking about. The man saw Harris look his way, so he walked over to a tree and pretended to look at his phone. It's okay, Freya. I'm here now, he said as he hugged her back and tried to reassure her. He could see she was quite anxious. Freya let go, and Harris took a look at his cousin. She still looked a little anxious, but he took in her clear, bright eyes framed with long eyelashes, flawless skin, and a kind smile. Silly boy, what are you staring at? She teased. Help me drag this suitcase and let's get rid of that loser. She nodded over her shoulder at the man under the tree who was staring surreptitiously over his phone. Freya gave the suitcase to Harris and looped her arm through his, and they hurried away. Freya walked quickly, obviously still quite afraid of the man and keen to put distance between them. But Harris had the awkward suitcase and was struggling to keep up. He cast his eyes back toward the man under the tree and gave him a cold stare. At the same time, he launched his 1,000-mile sound transmission skill. I'm warning you, get away from me and stay away from her, or I will waste you. They were now 50 yards away from where the man stood, but as Harris transmitted his message, he saw the man's reaction. He lifted his head suddenly and glanced back and forth with a look of surprise on his face. When he looked in Freya's direction, he saw Harris had stopped, turned around, and was staring at him with cold, dark eyes. The man quickly looked away, and Freya pulled on Harris. Come on, Harris, what's keeping you? Let's go, she urged. The man thought he was hearing things. He saw Harris looking at him, but he was so far away that it couldn't have been anything to do with him. The voice had come from right next to him as if someone were shouting in his ear. But there's no one around. I must have imagined it, he thought as he shook his head. Once he saw Harris had turned around, he decided to follow. Harris and Freya arrived at the taxi that had been waiting. Driver, thanks for waiting. Could you open the trunk, please? I need to put the suitcase in the back, he said. Okay, the driver answered. Then he looked at Freya. So this is your girlfriend. She's very beautiful. Harris immediately put him straight. No, this is my cousin, he said with a smile. Oh, I'm so sorry. No offense, he apologized and laughed awkwardly. None was taken, said Freya with a smile. We're very close. Harris opened the door for his cousin, and she climbed inside. He had just closed the door when the driver suddenly said, Do you know you're being followed? Get in quickly. The driver continued, You always have to be careful when you're out, especially you, young woman. Harris looked behind him, and sure enough, the man that had been standing under the tree wasn't far behind, and he was catching up quickly. When he saw Harris look his way, he turned his head to one side and pretended to be distracted by something. Harris had opened the door to climb inside, but instead, he just closed it again. He said to the driver through the open window, Could you please wait here for me for a moment? Episode 163, Journey in Silence. After he had instructed the driver to wait, Harris immediately went to approach the man who had been following his cousin. Hey, he yelled. I know you've been following my cousin. Cut it out. Get lost. He confronted the man angrily, but it seemed to have no effect on him. He just looked at Harris, shrugged his shoulders, and said, I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm walking along minding my own business. Harris was furious. He hated this type of person who made it unsafe for women and girls to walk the streets, and he hated that he was feigning innocence. Do you think I'm stupid? I know what you're up to. I'm warning you, unless you turn around and get out of here, you'll be sorry, Harris cautioned him. But the man continued with his act. Me? What am I up to? I don't understand what you mean. Are you mad? He asked. I've warned you once. If you follow us, I swear I'll kill you. You can ignore me if you like, but I mean it, said Harris. When the man heard the threat, a flash of understanding crossed his face. It was you, he exclaimed in surprise. He remembered the words he had heard in his ear before, outside the restaurant. But this kid had been more than 50 yards away at the time. It couldn't possibly have been him, he thought. He stood staring at Harris, but he hesitated too long, and Harris reached out and grasped the man by his shoulder. The man froze. The next moment, a loud clicking sound was heard, followed by a shrill scream, and the man doubled up in pain. Harris then pushed him away, and he collapsed in a heap on the ground. Then, quick as a flash, Harris turned, and when he faced the man again, he held up a large stone. The man looked up at him in fear and watched as Harris drew his hand back. He didn't see what happened next, but suddenly he felt an excruciating pain in his groin, and he began to scream in agony. The man curled up in a ball and continued to cry and moan. Harris gave him one last look of disgust and turned to walk back toward the taxi. Freya and the taxi driver both looked at Harris in stunned silence as he climbed calmly inside and said, Okay, driver, let's go. The driver replied, "Oh, okay." The drive from the restaurant back home passed in silence. The driver checked Harris out in his rearview mirror several times as he tried to work him out. He didn't look like the sort of person who would resort to violence. Indeed, he didn't look like the sort of kid who could hold his own in any confrontation. But he had just witnessed him do exactly that. Freya was also taken aback by Harris's conduct. While it was true that her mother and aunt didn't get along well, Freya had kept in regular contact with her aunt and her family by email, on social media, and by regular video calls. However, they rarely saw each other in person. "Maybe I don't know my cousin very well at all," thought Freya. "Can you know someone if you don't see them face to face on a regular basis?" And Harris was perturbed by the atmosphere in the car. Didn't I just teach that sleazeball a lesson? Why is everyone so quiet? And so, the journey continued in silence for the next 20 minutes until the taxi arrived at Harris's house. Harris climbed out of the car and retrieved the suitcase from the trunk. Then he paid the driver plus extra for waiting and a handsome tip. "Thank you, driver," said Harris politely. Then he turned to help his cousin with her suitcase. "So, this is where we live now. Come on in and I'll show you around," he said, and he wheeled the suitcase up to the front door. Freya was wide-eyed as she took in her surroundings and wondered how her cousin's family could afford to live in such a lovely house in such a nice neighborhood. She knew they weren't rich and didn't have money to throw around. "The property prices must be pretty steep here, Harris," she said. Freya knew very little really about her aunt's family. Her own family was quite influential and wealthy compared to her aunt's family, and her mother had always looked down on her sister. Both her mother and her aunt were stubborn, and their argument had lasted for years, neither one wishing to be the one to back down. Even now, her mother didn't know where she was. If she had told her where she was headed, she would have forbidden her to go. She had told her mom and dad that she was searching for the miracle worker in the video. She hadn't mentioned Chicago. But it seemed that what her mother had told her all these years about her aunt's family being poor wasn't true. How could that possibly be the case when they live in this high-end residential area? She thought. Episode 164. Bad News About Uncle Joe. Freya followed Harris up to the front door of the house. "Well, this couldn't have been cheap," commented Freya as she looked around at the house and its neighbors. Harris thought for a moment, and then he responded, "Well, it didn't cost that much. It was only $500,000. When Freya heard that, she nearly tripped up in shock. Harris caught her by the arm. "Hey, are you okay? What's up?" Freya just glared at him and pushed his arm away. "I'm okay," she snapped. "Not much. Who is he trying to kid? Where did they get that kind of money?" she wondered. Harris saw the look on his cousin's face and sighed. "Why is she being like this? I just don't get women," he thought. Harris was only being honest because, in truth, $500,000 wasn't much to him these days. But Freya didn't know about that and thought her cousin was bragging. "Anyway, thank you for today. Thank you for meeting me and getting me here safely and in one piece," she said. Harris put the key in the door and turned to his cousin. "Come in," he said. Freya stepped inside and looked around at the tastefully designed and decorated house. Isabella had heard someone at the door and rushed through from the kitchen. When she saw her niece, she called out in surprise. "Freya, is that you? How lovely to see you." And when Freya also saw her aunt Isabella, her eyes lit up, and they hugged each other tightly. A short while later, everyone was sitting in the lounge. Isabella's eyes were red and swollen from crying, and she held her cell phone and was fidgeting with it. Freya sat next to her on the couch, and her eyes were also red. John and Harris were also in the room, looking sad and miserable. Freya had finally explained the purpose of her visit. Not long ago, her father had complained of chest pain, and her mother had eventually persuaded him to visit a doctor. After several trips to the doctor and the hospital and following several tests, he had been diagnosed with advanced stage lung cancer. Freya had been called home from college so that her parents could break the news to her. Freya and her mother were heartbroken. Isabella was also devastated to hear the news. She couldn't imagine what her sister and brother-in-law were going through, and suddenly their falling out seemed unimportant. Freya's father owned a small cosmetics company, and the family was quite wealthy, so her mother had spent a lot of money obtaining the advice of various medical experts. But all the experts had agreed that her father's cancer was advanced and inoperable, and that the only treatment was chemotherapy, which would shrink the tumor, but a cure was unlikely. Her family was devastated. But Freya hadn't given up and had undertaken extensive research on the internet. Conventional medicine couldn't provide the answer, so she had been determined to investigate whether there were any alternative remedies that might offer the family some hope. While she had been carrying out her research, she had come across a video that had gone viral. It had shown a car accident where a pedestrian had been hit by a car and lay injured and dying on the road. The video had then shown a young passerby placing his hand on the forehead of the accident victim, and a short while afterward, the injured man had got back on his feet. Everyone was calling the young passerby a miracle worker. When Freya had seen the video, she had thought that maybe this person could help her father. If he could help someone who had been injured so badly in an accident, he could surely cure the disease. Freya had made further inquiries and established that the accident had happened in Chicago, which was the reason for her visit. She was searching for the young man in the video, the miracle worker. As she explained this to everyone, Harris had a strange look on his face. So, my cousin came to Chicago to look for me, he thought. Episode 165, Traditional Chinese Medical Knowledge. But Freya had no idea that the person in the video, the miracle worker, was her cousin. Harris watched as his mother cried, and he looked at Freya, with whom he had a close relationship. When he saw his mother and cousin so clearly heartbroken, he wanted to tell them it was him in the video and that he was the miracle worker. Should I tell them? He thought. But even if I told them, they wouldn't believe me. He pondered a little longer. I won't tell them for the time being, but I know I can help. I just need to make some arrangements, he decided. He looked at his mother. Mom, don't cry. Uncle Joe's a fighter. I'm sure he'll be okay. Then he turned to Freya. You must be tired. Why don't you rest for a while? I'll go out and get some snacks. He said goodbye to his parents and his cousin, and he left the house again. Harris hailed a taxi and headed straight for the library. Although I've saved a few people now, I haven't given any thought to actual medicine. I've just been using the vital essence, he thought. Using that is too wasteful. Now it's time for me to learn something about medical science. I need to try to understand. For normal people, learning something like medical science was a dream that took years to achieve. But Harris could accomplish this goal in a matter of seconds because he had a powerful tool in the system. The taxi dropped him off in front of the library, and he spent some time searching through the books in the medical section. When he picked up a large yellow volume, the system notification sounded. Discovered a book. Do you wish to decompose? Harris agreed without thinking. Decompose. Congratulations, host. You have successfully decomposed the medical class of the Yellow Emperor, obtained a medical crystal, skill point 1, and experience point 1. Medical crystallization contains part of the Yellow Emperor's medical skills and can control these skills by integration. Yin and Yang and 5 elements acupuncture method level 1, and acupuncture and moxibustion methods containing the 5 elements of heaven and earth. Congratulations on the success of decomposition. Do you want to extract and fuse? Harris looked at the book. He realized that it was a book on traditional Chinese medicine. First the guy in the park doing Tai Chi, and now a book on Chinese medicine. There seems to be a trend here, he thought, and he smiled. He could see the 2 crystals in his mind and understood that these were the medical skills, and he also had full knowledge of acupuncture methods. He didn't think there would be so much knowledge in a traditional Chinese medicine book, but he was happy to investigate and learn. Extract and fuse. On his command, the 2 crystals merged in his mind. A river of medical knowledge flooded his head, and he was almost overcome. He felt dizzy, so he sat down at a desk in the library while he regained his balance. And in an instant, Harris became a master of traditional Chinese medicine. Once the knowledge had poured through his brain, a warm current ran throughout the whole body, and he felt as rejuvenated as he had done when he had upgraded the samurai warrior martial arts method to level 3. Suddenly, he felt as if his life force itself had been upgraded. Episode 166, The Rose. Harris hadn't expected such a physical change decomposing a book, and he was confused. System, why do I feel there's been a change in my energy?
Host, yin and yang and all 5 elements must exist in the body of the practitioner. What you have experienced is the integration of all 5 elements in your energy force. Generally speaking, it is not possible for the human body to exist with all 5 elements simultaneously. The 5 elements cannot simultaneously coexist in the human's body's energy force in ordinary people. The elements come and go, and the skills come and go. However, Host, you are different from ordinary people. Due to the existence of the system, your energy force can accommodate all 5 elements at the same time. Host, you can therefore learn all the skills without any hidden dangers.
After listening to the system's explanation, Harris thought that he understood. The other people in the library noticed that Harris was smiling and seemed to be talking to himself. There were a couple of students at a nearby desk, and they moved to the other end of the library. Harris just ignored the strange stares of the people around him. People think I'm crazy. If only they knew, he thought, and he had to stifle a laugh. Harris tried his luck with the system with some other medical books he found, but he failed. Oh well, maybe this is all I need. I have so much more knowledge than I had before. Let's see if it works, he thought. So Harris left the library, picked up some snacks, and headed home. Once back inside the house, Harris noticed Isabella was outside in the yard, pacing back and forth, holding a cell phone, and looking at it occasionally with an anxious expression on her face. She looked as if she were about to make a call, and then she changed her mind at the last moment. Harris understood why she was so hesitant. Isabella was worried about her brother-in-law, but afraid to call because she didn't particularly want to speak to her sister. He couldn't understand why his mother and aunt couldn't put their differences aside at a time like this. Sometimes he didn't understand adults. That doesn't matter now, he thought. I'm going to tell them the truth about the man in the video. I'm going to tell them it was me. Then at least they'll have some hope, and Mom and Freya will be reassured. Dad! Mom! Freya! Can you all come to the dining room? I've got something to show you, he shouted. 10 minutes later, they were all gathered around the dining room table. In the center of the table was a rose in a small vase. The rose was past its best, and although not dead, it was dying. A few of the petals had fallen off, and it was wilting. Everyone, began Harris, I want to tell you something. But first, I'm going to show you something. Can you all see this rose? Everyone looked at Harris, bewildered and wondering what he was going to do next. Yes, Harris, said John. The rose has been there for a week. We're lucky it's lasted this long. Watch, said Harris, and he reached out his hand and slowly stroked the rose with his fingers. As they watched in awe, the rose came back to life. Everything about it took on a new lease of life, the leaves, the petals, and as they watched, it bloomed again. On one side of the table, Freya stared at Harris with a look of incredulity. Isabella rubbed her eyes as if it were all a dream. John was the only one to realize the significance of what his son had just performed. It was you in the video, wasn't it, Harris? You're the miracle worker, aren't you? His voice was calm and steady, even though he was as shocked as Isabella and Freya. Isabella and Freya immediately looked toward Harris as if they had been thrown a lifeline. Yes, Dad. It was me, he replied. Then he looked at his mother and cousin. Mom, Freya, try not to worry. I have this gift, and if I can revive a rose or an accident victim, then I'm sure I'll be able to help Uncle Joe. I'll go with Freya to see Uncle Joe tomorrow. I promise you all, everything will be all right, he continued. Freya looked at her cousin with mixed feelings. On the one hand, she had accomplished what she had come to Chicago to achieve. She had found the miracle worker in the viral video, and her father might be saved. On the other hand, she couldn't believe that the miracle worker was her cousin and that he was standing right in front of her. But more than anything, she was mystified by Harris's strange powers. John looked at his son with pride. He had many doubts and misgivings about what was happening to his son, but overall, he was proud and excited. And Isabella's face lit up with a smile. She could see that Freya was happy and that her father would be saved. Episode 167, Aunt Maggie. The following day, as soon as he had had breakfast, his mother drove him out of the house. "Go on," she said. "You have to go see your Uncle Joe as soon as possible. There's no time to waste." Harris had his bag in one hand and looked toward the door. Freya was ready to leave and said, laughing, "Come on, Harris, let's go. When you cure my dad, I'll treat you to a big meal." She gave Harris a hug, and once they had said goodbye to John and Isabella, they went on their way. Harris and Freya arrived at the hospital in the afternoon, and they walked through the main entrance together. Just before they were about to enter the elevator to the ward where Uncle Joe was staying, Freya tugged at Harris's sleeve. "Wait! Before we go up, I want to talk to you about something," she said, her voice serious. He stopped and turned to look at his cousin. "What's wrong, Freya?" he asked. She looked embarrassed, and then after hesitating just a moment, she said, "My mother might say some things you don't like when she sees you. I don't want you to get upset." As soon as Freya opened her mouth, Harris understood what she was trying to do. By warning him, he wouldn't be surprised by any unkind treatment. Freya thought there might be a risk that he would turn on his heels and walk out if her mother said something that upset him. It was a preemptive strike on her part, and he looked at her and gave her his most reassuring smile. "Well, I know that your mother doesn't like me, and I'm sure she won't be happy to see me, but I'm here to see your father. Not only is he your father, but he's my uncle too," he said. "Even if your mom says something bad, don't worry. I've got thick skin. I'm not going to let anything stop me from helping my uncle," he reassured her kindly. Freya was relieved to hear Harris say this, but she was sad that her cousin and mom didn't get along. She sighed, and when the elevator arrived, they rode it to the 19th floor. As the elevator doors opened, Harris almost collided with a well-dressed, middle-aged woman who was waiting to get in. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying. "Mom," said Freya, "are you all right? How's Dad? Is he—" she asked anxiously. "Oh, darling Freya, I'm so glad to see you," said her mother as she gathered her daughter into a huge hug. "Don't worry, your father's resting now." Then she took her by the shoulders and said, "But sweetheart, I thought you were going to track down that miracle worker you saw online. Why are you back so soon? Did you find him?" Then she turned and saw Harris for the first time, and her face fell. "Hello, Aunt Maggie," said Harris politely. But Maggie pulled her daughter away to one side as Freya tried to explain to her mother what was going on. "She is rude and annoying, but I'm very fond of my uncle, and I want to help him if I can," thought Harris. Freya and Aunt Maggie went and stood a short distance away, and were talking quietly. Then Harris turned his head and saw his aunt was looking directly at him. Episode 168, Consultation with the Doctors. Freya and her mother were standing just outside the door to the stairwell, and after a few moments, Harris walked toward them. Maggie turned to stare at him as he approached. "Did your mother ask you to come?" she demanded. "You've never been a good student, and I don't suppose you have much hope in the college entrance exam. I bet you can't wait to get out of school." Harris stood quietly and let her continue. "And I bet your mother told you to come and muscle in," she accused him. "I know Father left her share of the business. What do you think you're going to do? Do you think you can just walk into a career with no qualifications or experience? Maybe you want to take over the running of the company? Do you really think now is a good time, with your uncle dying in the hospital?" She looked at him defiantly. "Well, am I right?" she asked. Is that why you're here? Freya listened to her mother accuse Harris and opened her mouth to try and explain. Mom, she began, but Maggie continued. How could you? Your uncle is sick, and that's all your family can think about? Maggie said venomously. And then she quickly turned to her daughter and snapped. And you can shut up, Freya. Don't try to interrupt me when I'm speaking. As Harris listened to his aunt speak, he realized what a pompous and unkind snob she was. It was no wonder that she and Isabella didn't get along. Harris began to explain. But that was as far as he got, and without waiting for Harris to say another word, Maggie interrupted him. I don't care why you're here. We have enough problems at the moment, and I don't want you talking about anything in front of your uncle that might upset him. If you do, I'll have you thrown out. Then she looked at her daughter with a fierce look in her eyes and said, You can come with me now to speak to Professor William and Dr. Gillespie about the latest test results. And with that, Maggie turned on her heel and walked away. Freya gave Harris an apologetic look, but Harris wasn't bothered. Together they followed Maggie to the doctor's office, where they would speak to two physicians engaged by Freya's mother to treat Joe. Dr. Gillespie was the hospital doctor, and Professor William was a highly regarded oncologist. The professor took them through the initial prognosis. Mr. Lawson has a lung tumor measuring 15 millimeters by 45 millimeters. As you know, we performed a biopsy. The tests have confirmed that it is cancer, and it has reached an advanced stage. He paused to allow the information to sink in before he continued. I'm afraid that we can't perform a resection. Treatment is limited to embolization, which will block blood flow to the tumor in an attempt to restrict its growth. And there are other limited intervention procedures we can use to try to prevent the cancer cells from continuing to spread. However, we can make no guarantees as to Mr. Lawson's survival time at this stage. We can provide you with more information once we know how he responds to treatment. But you should also be aware that his health could deteriorate at any time. Dr. Gillespie added, That's the situation that we're faced with at the moment. Do you have any questions? Maggie had already been provided with this information, but she still couldn't accept it. As she sat there, she started to clutch at straws. Dr. Gillespie, Professor William, do you think that there is any alternative medicine that might treat this disease? She asked. She was desperate, and she would try anything. What about herbal remedies, or homeopathy, or traditional Chinese medicine? Surely it's worth trying everything, she asked. The doctors looked at each other, and eventually Professor William answered her. While it's true that some alternative medicines are successful in treating minor ailments, there is no evidence that any traditional or herbal remedies will help in a diagnosis such as this. In fact, there are occasions when it could do more harm than good, he warned. Dr. Gillespie nodded in agreement. I have to agree with the professor. Miss Lawson, traditional therapy shouldn't be considered as an alternative to conventional treatment. Dr. Gillespie nodded in agreement. I have to agree with the professor, Miss Lawson. Traditional therapy shouldn't be considered as an alternative to conventional treatment. Maggie was visibly disappointed when she heard this, and Freya also felt discouraged. They were both losing hopes. But Harris had also listened closely to everything the doctors had said, and when they had dismissed out of hand the efficacy of traditional Chinese medicine, he couldn't help but laugh out loud. Episode 169. Harris Analyzes the Doctor. Harris's laughter immediately attracted everyone's attention. Maggie looked at Harris angrily, and if she hadn't been in the presence of the two doctors, she would have given him a piece of her mind. Dr. Gillespie frowned and didn't look very happy. Who is this? He asked. Maggie was afraid that the doctors might think Harris discourteous, and she began to make excuses for him. I'm sorry, Dr. Gillespie. This is Harris, my nephew. I have to apologize for him. I'm sure he doesn't mean to be rude, she hurriedly explained before glaring again at Harris. Isn't that right, Harris? She asked pointedly. Freya was surprised by Harris's behavior, and she frowned. But Harris ignored his aunt and his cousin. That's very interesting, Dr. Gillespie, but I'm afraid I don't agree with everything you say, he said. Young people these days are interested in all kinds of alternative remedies, not just conventional medicine. They like to keep an open mind, he said. I have a particular interest in traditional Chinese medicine, which has been practiced for centuries. I will happily demonstrate some of my skills, he offered. Maggie glared at Harris as if she wanted to throw him out of the window. Meanwhile, Harris stared intently at Dr. Gillespie for a few moments. What he said next shocked everyone. Dr. Gillespie, you're sick. In fact, you're very sick, he said. Dr. Gillespie opened his mouth to respond, but Harris continued to speak. I can see that your eyes are slightly bloodshot, your lips are dry, and your skin has an almost imperceptible yellow tone. Do you often feel that your throat is dry and itchy? When was the last time you had a good night's sleep? Has your chest felt tight recently? And do you sometimes struggle to breathe properly? As Dr. Gillespie listened to Harris's analysis, his face changed from disdain to surprise, and then finally shock. Everything this boy says is true. How can he possibly know all this? I haven't mentioned these symptoms to anyone, not even my wife, he thought. He certainly hadn't consulted a physician, and as yet, he had not received a diagnosis. He was simply too busy to attend a doctor's surgery himself these days. But this boy has described all his symptoms, and he claimed to do so using traditional Chinese medicine. If he can analyze my condition, maybe he can diagnose me. Perhaps he could even cure me, he thought fleetingly. Then he pushed the thought out of his mind and shook his head. He looked at Harris and said, You're full of nonsense. I haven't noticed any of the things that you mentioned. You don't know what you're talking about. You're not a doctor. Who do you think you are? Harris continued to hold the doctor's gaze, and he replied, Well, these are only the small things that I can tell at first glance. Without waiting for him to make any further objections, Harris added, And now that I look more closely, I can see some fine purple thread veins around your neck. I think you may have some circulation problems, doctor. As he said this, everyone turned to look at Dr. Gillespie and saw that Harris was right. Episode 170, The Case for Alternative Therapies. Everyone thought these were tiny little changes that no one would have noticed had Harris not pointed them out. Everyone was shocked that Harris had noticed these things at all. How could he possibly know what to look for? They all thought. Then Harris continued. All these symptoms result from poisoning, but the tiny purple thread veins really gave it away. The poison takes a while to take hold, but it causes all the symptoms you complain of, he explained. Then he pointed to the doctor's suit jacket and asked, What's that in your pocket, doctor? Dr. Gillespie patted his pocket, and it was clear that there was something inside. He looked surprised as he placed his hand inside and pulled out a small silk sachet. What's this? He said, obviously confused. I didn't put it there. Everyone else in the room looked at the unfolding events with great interest. Is everything all right at home, Dr. Gillespie? Asked Harris. The doctor blushed and muttered something unintelligible, but which sounded like, That's none of your business. I see. So things aren't going so well at home, Harris observed. Dr. Gillespie was indignant, but going by the terrified look on his face, he was also worried. Open the sachet, doctor, if you don't believe me. Be careful not to touch anything, though, said Harris. I imagine there will be something like monk's hood or deadly nightshade inside. Both these plants are highly poisonous, as you would both know, Professor William and Dr. Gillespie. Dr. Gillespie took the silk sachet and stood up to find a knife to slice it open. When he had done so, he poured the contents onto the desk. Sure enough, when everyone looked at what had been in the sachet, they saw various parts of the monk's hood plant mixed in with some rose petals for fragrance. When he saw this, Dr. Gillespie collapsed back into his chair. He couldn't believe it. Everyone in the room was shocked. When Harris spoke again, no one interrupted, and everyone paid him close attention. It would be difficult to detect the presence of the poison, as the fragrance of the rose petals masks the odor of the monk's hood. The poisoning takes several days when the victim is only exposed to small amounts incrementally. Symptoms are mild to begin with, but once the substance has been ingested, the effects are generally irreversible. It's one of these things that it wouldn't even occur to you to look for, he concluded. Everyone listened to Harris speak, and slowly the realization dawned that he was saying that Dr. Gillespie had been poisoned, and he would very likely die. Harris looked at Dr. Gillespie, whose face was now as white as a sheet, and said, "As I said, if you're experiencing these symptoms, there is no known antidote, and it's likely that the effects are irreversible." He continued, "Although that is only true of conventional medicine, which has no known cure or antidote to this poisoning, I have my own treatment, which would be 100% successful." Dr. Gillespie's face lit up when he heard this, until Harris spoke again. "But of course, you wouldn't be interested in any treatment I had to offer because you have no faith in alternative remedies." "But of course, I would be willing to try," said the doctor eagerly. Harris waved his hand dismissively and said, "Why should I treat you?" And in an instant, all hope disappeared from Dr. Gillespie's eyes once more. Harris continued, "You're so arrogant that you believe only in your own conventional methods. Alternative medicine has been around a lot longer than conventional medicine and has been proved to be beneficial in so many areas of health and well-being. Many traditions cater to both the body and the soul, treating the person as a whole. If someone dismisses all other methods other than their own, not only does that mean he has a closed mind, but he isn't prepared to listen to different points of view. Even with your conventional medicine, how does that help with progress? Alternative therapies are a part of our culture and cultures everywhere around the world. In our own country, Native Americans have their own traditional medicines prepared from recipes passed through generations and going back centuries, if not more. And not only that, but some alternative therapies can also work alongside conventional medicine so that they can complement each other. More research needs to be done." And after his long speech, Harris finally stopped and looked down at his hands. Episode 171. Long time no see. A few seconds after Harris had finished his mammoth speech in defense of alternative therapies everywhere, the room's occupants heard the sounds of thunderous applause outside the room. "Well said," said one voice. "I've been saying that for years," said another. When Harris opened the door, he saw a large group of patients and their families gathered outside. They had heard raised voices and been attracted to what they thought was an argument, but what had turned out to be a passionate advocacy for complementary medicine. Many people felt the same way. While they trusted implicitly in science and conventional medicine, many people felt there was a place for traditions and therapies that had been around for a very long time and had been all but forgotten. Harris looked at the doctors and said, "Come on, Freya, let's go." He headed out of the room, but stopped and turned around when he heard someone call his name. He looked inside the office and saw Dr. Gillespie gazing up at him. "Harris, I'm sorry if I offended you. I wonder, could you please help me? I'm frightened, and I don't know what to do," he pleaded. Harris was stunned and couldn't believe this sudden turn of events. Freya looked at the doctor, who now looked rather pathetic, and became angry when she remembered how he had ridiculed her cousin. She urged Harris to leave. "Come on, you're right, let's go," she said, leaving Maggie behind in the office, who was completely bewildered and had no idea what to make of everything. Just as she was leaving the office, Freya turned back to her mother as if she had just remembered something. "I forgot to tell you, Mom. I found the miracle worker," she said. "What?" asked Maggie in surprise. "It's Harris," she said. "Harris is the miracle worker, and he says he'll cure Dad." And with that, Freya turned to chase after Harris without giving her mother an opportunity to react. Maggie looked startled and watched Harris and Freya as they disappeared down the corridor. Finally, she got up and began to follow them. Harris and Freya made their way to room 34 on the 19th floor, and Harris finally met up with his long-lost Uncle Joe. He remembered his uncle as high-spirited and full of life, but now he lay sleeping in a hospital bed. He noticed how pale he was and how much weight he had lost, and when he woke up, his voice was weak. "Uncle Joe, it's me, Harris. I've come to see you," he said gently. When Joe saw his nephew, he was both surprised and delighted. "Is that really you, Harris?" he asked. "Wow, you're not a kid anymore. You've grown so tall." And they spent a few minutes catching up before Maggie arrived. "Maggie, Look who's here, he said to his wife. Joe didn't know that Maggie already knew Harris was at the hospital. Maggie was embarrassed and didn't know what to say. Harris took one look at his aunt and saw she had a defeated expression on her face. In that moment, he realized how devastated and heartbroken she was that she might soon lose her beloved husband. He turned to his uncle and said softly, "Aunt Maggie and I have already met." But he didn't mention anything else. When she heard this, she looked at Harris with gratitude. Harris sat on one side of Joe's bed, and they talked for a while, and Maggie sat on the other side, lost in her thoughts. She was beginning to think she had been a little hasty and misjudged her nephew, and when she thought about what her daughter had said just now, she realized that Harris might be the only person who could save her husband's life. "I've made such a mess of everything," she thought. "I wouldn't be surprised if he didn't want to help. I wouldn't blame him." Then she looked at her husband lying in bed, and she knew she would do whatever it took to give him every chance of getting better. "Harris," she said, interrupting his conversation with her husband, "please help your uncle. You're the only one who can save him." Then she took a card from her purse and handed it to Harris. "Here's $1 million. Please take it, but please try to do what you can to help your uncle," she begged him. Episode 172. Not in my hospital. Harris saw the card and heard what Maggie said, and he felt wretched. "Aunt Maggie, when did I say I wouldn't help? Of course I want to help. I'm just trying to understand what's wrong. And as for money, I don't need your money. Please keep it." He spoke kindly, but their conversation alerted Joe. "What are you talking about?" he asked. "You can't help me, Harris. No one can help me. I've got advanced stage cancer, and it's terminal. There's no cure. There's nothing anyone can do." Then he smiled sadly. "Uncle Joe, what are you saying? It's just cancer. It's not serious," Harris said, trying to make light of the situation. "Give me just a few minutes, and I'll have you so fit that you'll live to be 100, fit as a fiddle." He was trying to comfort his uncle, but Joe was resigned to his fate, and he had no reason to have faith in his nephew. He gave a sad laugh and said, "Well, I can assure you that I won't be here for much longer. But go on, I'll let you try your amazing medical skills out on me." Harris knew that his uncle didn't believe him, but he didn't try to convince him. Instead, he turned to his aunt and his cousin. "Freya, Aunt Maggie, could you leave me alone with Uncle Joe for a moment? I'm going to see if I can cure him," he said with a smile. Maggie's and Freya's eyes lit up. "Yes, of course," they both said excitedly. But just at that moment, a voice came from outside the door. "Just a minute," the voice boomed, and then the door opened. A tall and imposing older man wearing a suit walked in, followed closely by Professor William, Dr. Gillespie, and several other doctors. "President Myers," said Maggie, "what are you doing here?" "It's my hospital," he said rather rudely. "Why wouldn't I be here?" Then he turned to stare at Harris. "Are you the boy who's saying he can cure cancer?" he asked. "You're making a fool of yourself. This man has already been examined by the very best experts. The diagnosis is advanced stage cancer, and we can only take measures to control the spread and provide palliative care, but it is incurable." Then he turned to Joe. "Do you honestly believe this kid, barely out of high school, can cure cancer? He's crazy. You're crazy if you believe that, and he's cruel by letting you think that he can. I will not allow this in my hospital," he shouted. Maggie and Freya anxiously looked at Harris. Harris felt helpless and frustrated. All he was trying to do was help, but there was always someone trying to get in his way. He was fed up justifying himself and making excuses. "I don't know who you are," Harris said to the president, "and I don't care whether you believe in my medical skills or not, but I can assure you that I have no ulterior motive. I just want to help, and I know I can help." Harris then turned to his uncle and said, "Uncle, it's your decision." "If you allow this to go ahead, Mr. Lawson," said the president, "I'll do my utmost to stop him. I'll break his leg if I have to." "Really?" said Harris. Then he took hold of the steel guardrail on the side of his uncle's bed and pressed it flat between his thumb and forefinger. Everyone stopped talking and looked on in shock. You... how? The president spluttered. Suddenly, Joe yelled at the top of his voice. No more noise! Joe looked at Harris and apologized to the president. President Myers, he said, I don't have much time left, and since I've already consulted with the best doctors and specialists at your hospital, I would like to see what my nephew can do. What have I got to lose? The president was furious, but there was nothing he could say, and when he saw the warning in Harris's eyes, he took a step backward. After seeing what he could do to a steel pipe, there was no knowing what damage he could do to a mere mortal. Dr. Gillespie suddenly saw an opportunity to help Joe Lawson get what he wanted and earn approval from Harris and potentially gain favor with the president. He stood up and said, President Myers, I'd like to stand as guarantor for Harris. Shall we let him have a try? Episode 173, Acupuncture. The president looked at Dr. Gillespie and wondered why he had come forward with such a guarantee. He considered the matter further, turned to Harris and said, Very well. In that case, I'll let you proceed. And to Dr. Gillespie, he said, If anything goes wrong, I shall hold you personally responsible. This has nothing to do with the hospital. Dr. Gillespie agreed. Yes, of course, President Myers. President Myers then adjusted his suit jacket and turned to leave, followed by Professor William and the other doctors. Only Dr. Gillespie remained. The doctor smiled at Harris and nodded. Harris was confused by his behavior and why he had remained in the room. Dr. Gillespie said, You may now proceed. As you just heard, you have my full support. I'll be waiting just outside should you need anything, and I'll ensure that you aren't disturbed. Then the doctor left the room, followed by Maggie and Freya. The door closed behind them, and finally, only Harris and his uncle were left in the room. Joe looked at Harris and started to laugh. Come on, Harris. You can't seriously think you can cure me. But Harris lifted his bag and retrieved a dark green carved jade box. The box itself was an extraordinary work of art. He opened the box, and inside were 9 jade needles. Joe watched with interest. It seems that there is more to you than meets the eye, he said, but he still didn't believe that Harris had the power to save him. Harris held a jade needle and looked at his uncle lying in the hospital bed. Uncle Joe, could you unbutton your shirt? First, I'm going to lock the cancer cells to prevent them from spreading any further. That's the first thing I need to do, he explained. Joe did as he was asked and bared his chest, and Harris removed one of the needles from the box. He then channeled his yin and yang vital energy as he prepared to inject the needle. He then concentrated on gathering the 5 elements of wood, fire, earth, metal, and water, and then he was ready to begin. Harris swiftly inserted the needles painlessly in a circle formation on his uncle's chest. Once in place, the 5 elements flowed through the needles into Joe's body, providing him with the energy required to lock all the cancer cells, preventing their further spread throughout his body. Joe suddenly felt cool air spread all over the surface of his body, and a sense of comfort from his chest where the needles were. Then Harris said, Uncle, I'm now going to purge the cancerous cells from your body. This process might be painful. Are you absolutely certain you wish to go through with it? He added, If you think it will be too much, I can make you sleep. But if you think you can bear it, I'll go ahead now. What do you want me to do? He asked. Joe looked at him and shook his head vigorously. No, I can bear it. I'm afraid that if I close my eyes, I won't open them again. Just do it, he said. Harris nodded. Okay, we'll do it. Just try to be still and be patient for a while. After that, Harris pressed his hand in the center of the circle of the 9 jade needles and closed his eyes. He suddenly felt extremely nervous. He had no idea whether he would succeed or not, but he only knew that he had to give it a try. System, break down all cancerous cells. Episode 174, Immortality Skill. As soon as Harris gave the order, the response came from the system.
Yes, host.
When he heard the system prompt, he was relieved for a moment. The system hasn't said the cancer cells can't be decomposed, so it seems my plan may be feasible, he thought tentatively. Harris believed that this probably had to be the best use of the system decomposition, completely eliminating cancer cells. He couldn't think of a better use for it. However, he hadn't been confident about his plan to begin with. After all, cancerous cells mingle with other healthy cells, and, of course, he couldn't physically handle cancer cells because they are inaccessible. However, he hoped that he had gotten around the problem by using the acupuncture needles.
Congratulations to host's success in decomposing a large number of cancer cells. You have acquired the innate skill of Immortal Body and obtained skill point 1.2 and experience point 1.2. Immortality level 1. With it, you can defy death. One day, you may even tire of living. Fuse it, and all your cells will mutate. The mutated cells will have strong ability of rapid proliferation and super strong self-healing ability. Nothing can stop your cells from regenerating. The decomposition is successful. Do you want to extract and fuse?
Harris was shocked when he heard all this from the system. It was describing a science fiction superhero. Self-healing? Immortal? He wondered. Harris was thinking about everything the system had told him, trying to take it all in, when he heard a loud scream from his uncle. Although the decomposition of the system was almost complete, his uncle's nerves had only just begun to transmit the pain signals. There had been some kind of time delay, but he could see his uncle was in great pain. He was covered in sweat, shivering, and moaning. No wonder he was in so much pain when so much of his body was being decomposed. Meanwhile, Maggie and Freya were waiting anxiously outside the room, and they kept glancing nervously toward the door. Dr. Gillespie tried to reassure them. Mrs. Lawson, try not to worry. Mr. Lawson will be fine. I'm sure Harris will do everything he can, he said. Maggie smiled awkwardly. Thank you, Dr. Gillespie. But suddenly, a shrill scream from inside the room startled them all. They all rushed toward the door, but Harris's stern voice urged them. Don't come in! Harris then addressed the system. System, use a bottle of vital essence.
Yes, host.
And so, the last bottle of vital essence in the system space was administered by infusion via Harris's hand. The effect was immediate. The system had decomposed cancerous cells, which needed to be replaced. The vital essence provided cells with increased vitality, and they were stimulated to multiply and replenish the missing cells from Joe's lung. As the cells were replaced, the pain was slowly eased. Then Harris arranged for another infusion of the 5 elements. He undertook the same preparations and transferred his vital energy through 9 jade needles into his uncle's body to provide him with more energy to help deal with the rapid decomposition of his cells.
Let's go. Safe for accident.
Episode 175. Mission completed. Although it took some time, Harris managed to control Joe's pain. He removed the needles, but his uncle's face was pale following all the vital energy consumption. Harris had also used the 5 elements procedure twice in succession, which would have hugely impacted his uncle's body. Joe had really been through the ringer, and once the procedure was at an end, he fell into a deep sleep. Harris looked at his uncle and smiled. Then he remembered his aunt and cousin outside the room, waiting for news, so he called out to them. Freya, Aunt Maggie, come in, he said in a weak voice, and the door opened, and both mother and daughter rushed into the room. They were followed by Dr. Gillespie, who stood toward the back of the room. He was anxious to please Harris in a bid to persuade him to treat him for his own ailment, but for now, he remained silent. Harris sat down warily in a chair, and Maggie and Freya approached the bed where Joe lay sleeping. And then they looked at Harris and waited for him to explain what had happened. I've treated Uncle Joe, but it wasn't easy. It was very painful for him, which is why you heard him call out earlier. But now he's better, and as you can see, he's resting. We should let him sleep for now, he said. But did it work? Asked Maggie anxiously as she looked at her husband sleeping peacefully. I've removed all the cancerous cells. you should arrange for him to
Her
undergo a
life's
comprehensive
working on this one.
examination, he said. Maggie and Freya were overjoyed when they heard this. Dr. Gillespie was surprised, but he suggested, okay, let's arrange for Mr. Lawson to have a thorough examination. Leave it to me. Harris nodded. Thank you, Dr. Gillespie. The doctor was pleased that Harris had acknowledged him, and he hoped he would now consider treating him. Freya looked over at Harris and noticed that he looked drained and hollow. Are you all right, Harris? You look exhausted. Is there anything I can do? She asked, concerned. I'm okay, he replied. I'm just a little tired. I just need to rest. Freya seemed reassured by his words. Then Maggie, who had been at her husband's bedside, looked at her nephew.
You know what? Let's
She had
try,
been so
try
angry.
something. Pause this for a sec. Go back to YouTube. Go to my channel. Bedtime. Yeah. I fell asleep for a couple hours just now. Oh, pocket. Okay.
Angry and bitter all this time, but she relented when she noticed how drained of energy her nephew appeared. She swallowed her pride and walked over to Harris. Thank you, Harris. I've misjudged you. Will you forgive me? Harris looked up at his aunt and smiled. If the family rift is healed, it would all have been worth it, he thought. We're family, Aunt Maggie. I only did what anyone would do for their family, he said with a weak smile. Freya put her arms around Harris's shoulder and gave him a hug. It's time the family let go of the past and moved on, she thought. Shortly afterward, 2 hospital porters came to take Joe to undergo further examination. They transferred him to a trolley and wheeled him out of the room, followed closely behind by Maggie and Dr. Gillespie, who were keen to know the latest examination results. Freya stayed with Harris and helped him climb into Joe's bed. Soon, his eyes were closed, and he sank into the system. Episode 176, Fighting Fit. Harris hadn't forgotten the skill he had acquired when decomposing the cancer cells. As soon as his mind sank into the system, he heard it communicate with him.
Decomposition complete. Do you wish to extract and fuse?
System, extract and fuse. As soon as he gave the order, he instantly felt a strange feeling wash throughout his entire body. Every gene in every cell in his body was being fundamentally altered and mutated. The process caused his whole body to twitch and jerk and resulted in indescribable pain, causing him to scream at the top of his voice. Freya grabbed hold of her cousin's arm in alarm. Harris! Harris, are you all right? What's the matter? But fortunately, the pain lasted for only a second or two, and Harris's body relaxed once more. With all the cells throughout his entire body mutated, Harris instantly felt full of strength again. In fact, he felt stronger than he had ever felt before. He was just about to check his personal information panel on the system when he heard Freya crying softly next to the bed. He quit the system and opened his eyes. He sat up and reached over to take his cousin by the hand. Freya, it's okay. I'm okay, he assured her. Please don't cry. She was relieved to see he was okay. And once he had convinced her that he only needed to rest a little longer, He persuaded her to go and find her mom and dad and find out the latest examination results. Once Freya had left the room, Harris lay down on the bed again and consulted the system. System, open my personal information panel. Then he looked at the updated information available.
Host, Harris, level 3, age 18, strength 24, agility 6.1, spirit 4.6, hacker level 5, total skill points 14, personal space open.
When Harris saw all this information on his personal panel, he was ecstatic. He had a long list of skills to which he had added the Immortal Body skill, which was something very special. However, he noted that the Immortal Body skill was only at level 1, and it took 100 experience points to upgrade. It seems that there's a long way to go to actual immortality, he thought. Just over an hour later, Joe was brought back to the room accompanied by Maggie and Freya, and they brought with them the fantastic news that the tests revealed no trace of cancer cells anywhere in his uncle's body. The hospital had to accept that cancer had been removed, although no one could explain exactly how. Joe was still weak, but otherwise, he was in perfect health. Everyone at the hospital was completely at a loss as to how he had made a full recovery from such a bleak prognosis. Professor William and Dr. Gillespie had not believed the results for the first time around, so they had completed the tests a second time, but they had been identical. Joe was a perfectly healthy individual with no trace of cancer and could be discharged as soon as he felt able. Joe could go home to his family. Episode 177. Build Up Your Strength. President Myers, in particular, had been astounded by the events that day. He spent time examining all of Joe's reports and test results, and while he could hardly believe what he was seeing, he had no choice but to accept that this man had been cured of his cancer. And it seemed that the person responsible was no more than a boy. According to his aunt and uncle, he was still in high school. Furthermore, according to the aunt, he was not a boy who achieved particularly good grades at school, but he was turning out to be a bit of an enigma. However, despite this, President Myers made an instant decision to find Harris and offer him a lot of money to work for the hospital. Just imagine, he thought, if we have a miracle doctor who can cure cancer, the hospital will be world famous. He briefly considered his confrontation with Harris earlier that day, but dismissed it. He would be able to persuade the young man to work for him. He would just have to make him an offer he couldn't refuse. There was nothing that money couldn't buy. Everyone had their price. But first, President Myers went in search of Dr. Gillespie. When he found him, he asked him, "What do you know about this boy, Harris?" "I know nothing about him. He just arrived at the hospital and said he could treat his uncle using alternative medicine," Dr. Gillespie told the president. "Do you know what alternative medicine he used? Did he say how he cured his uncle?" "What do you know about him?" the president asked again. "As I said, I don't know. All I know is that he said he would cure his uncle, and he did. I'm not sure we'll ever get answers to our questions," sighed Dr. Gillespie. "Where is he now?" asked the president. "He's with his uncle and his family in room 34 on the 19th floor," Dr. Gillespie informed them. And so, the president headed to room 34. In room 34, Joe had returned from his full round of physical tests, and Harris's body had completely recovered following his extraction and fusion of the immortality skill. Both of them were well on the road to recovery. Joe looked at his nephew in wonder. "Yesterday, I was diagnosed with inoperable and terminal cancer. Today, I am free of that horrible disease. How did that happen?" He found it hard to believe that his nephew had been the one that had cured him. Harris saw his uncle watching him, and he became embarrassed and uncomfortable. "Uncle Joe, you probably feel a little weak now. You must eat and rest. You need to build up your strength again," Harris advised him. "But you're fit and healthy now, and you can leave the hospital as soon as you feel able. Make sure Aunt Maggie cooks you lots of lovely, nutritious food when you get home. You especially need to eat lots of fruits and vegetables," Harris said with a smile. Joe beamed at his nephew. He did indeed feel on top of the world, both physically and mentally. He felt stronger and more relaxed than he had done in a long time. He looked at his wife and daughter and saw the joy and relief on their faces, and he made a decision. In that case, let's get out of here now. I don't want to spend a moment longer here than I have to, he said. Great, let's get the discharge procedure started now, said Harris. Just then, Dr. Gillespie entered the room. He had overheard that Joe was going to be discharged, and he needed Harris to treat him for his poisoning. Harris, could I speak to you for a moment? Asked Dr. Gillespie. But just then, the president, who had also heard about Joe's imminent discharge, came through the door and announced to the room, No! I'm afraid we can't release you from the hospital just yet, Mr. Lawson. Although you appear to be in complete remission from cancer, you're still very weak, and you'll require specific nutritional treatment before you're well enough to be discharged. We can't take any chances, he said. I insist you remain here for 2 more days while we get you back to full health and fighting fit, he continued. What he said seemed reasonable, and Maggie was in a dilemma. She wanted to take her husband home, but the head of the hospital was insisting that he remain for further treatment. She looked to Harris for guidance. The president also looked to Harris. Harris, you've performed nothing short of a miracle today. I'm sorry I doubted you. Can you forgive me? Harris was surprised to hear the president apologize, but he wasn't really interested in what he had to say, and he paid it no heed. So then the president got straight to the point. Harris, I would like to employ you to work at the hospital. We would be willing to pay you $5 million a year for your services. When Harris didn't react, he added, and if you're not satisfied with that salary, the figure is up for discussion. Everyone looked at the president in shock. Episode 178. The hospital got it wrong. Everyone was shocked when they heard the head of the hospital offer a salary of $5 million to a young man who wasn't even out of high school. That was an astronomical amount, even if he was good at medicine. But then they considered that maybe that sum of money wasn't too high if it was true that Harris was a miracle worker who could cure cancer. Maybe $5 million wasn't enough. Maggie gave Harris a strange look as she tried to work him out. I threw all sorts of accusations at him when he arrived, but he insisted he had no ulterior motive and just wanted to help. Then he saved my husband's life, she thought, and now he's been offered an annual salary of $5 million. For a long time, everyone's eyes were on Harris as they tried to guess his next move. But Harris understood the motives behind the president's offer. People all over the world are diagnosed with cancer every day, young and old, rich and poor, and it doesn't matter whether you have money or not. Money is useless against something like cancer. With all the technology in the world, thought Harris, I'm the only person who can actually cure cancer. If news gets out, it will only be the very rich who can afford to attend this hospital. In that case, $5 million isn't really very much at all. Harris looked at President Myers with contempt. Do you really think $5 million is a lot of money? Don't you think that if news gets out, someone rich will immediately pay me $5 million to help them? The president could say nothing in response to this. Everyone in the room knew that Harris was right. The president's face froze. He's right, he thought. There are many rich people in the world and many rich people who suffer from cancer, but only one person can cure the disease. Harris stood up, went over to the president, and patted him on the shoulder. And just at that moment, exactly where Harris had touched the president's shoulder, he felt excruciating pain. The president looked at him in horror. What was that? He asked in fear. Harris looked him in the eye and said, Although I can treat cancer, it is at a great cost to me, and I do not want to do it every day. I do not want this to become public knowledge, and I definitely do not want to work for your hospital. He smiled and said, And that was just a warning for you. He stared at the president for a few moments longer, and then he continued. If anyone asks, this is what happened. My uncle was not ill. Your hospital misdiagnosed him. Is that clear? Then he moved closer to the president and said quietly so that no one else could overhear. Keeping a very close eye on you. If the news gets out, that little twinge in your shoulder that you felt just then will turn into a pain 100 times worse and spread throughout your entire body as you die a slow and painful death. The president went white. But how? I can cure cancer, but I have many other skills. This will be my way of ensuring that you stick to our deal, he explained. The president nodded his head vigorously. Yes, of course. Harris continued. Please ensure that the correct version of events is provided. I trust we understand each other? Yes, of course, the president said. Finally satisfied that he had made his position clear with the president, he looked away and caught sight of Dr. Gillespie standing on the other side of the room. Then he looked back at the president as he seemed to remember something. Oh, and you should know that what I've left behind in your shoulder cannot be removed by anyone apart from me. I'm the only one with these abilities, he said. Everyone in the room looked at Harris with fear in their eyes.
You don't wanna fuck with him, jeez.
Episode 170.
Pause. I'm gonna start right